Let's move on then to corporate earnings and Lupin in focus. Their profits have beat estimates and margins have come in line. Joining in right now on the show is Nilesh Gupta, the managing director at Lupin. We also have with us Ramesh Swaminathan, the CFO of the company. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out. I'm going to come to you first then, Mr. Gupta. Explain to us how the last quarter has fared for Lupin, because there have been a lot of hiccups overseas in the US as well as for China, and India as well has seen a bit of a blip.
Sure. I have to say I am amazingly proud of the way our company has done in the course of the last 9 weeks. Right from that first week where obviously we were floundering, figuring out what is the, what's going on. But I think there was just so much control. There was just so much of, ensuring social distancing, ensuring supply continuity, making sure that product left, whether it was for India, whether it was for the US. We were able to do a very commendable job in the course of, I would say, Q4, but also into April and May. To give you an idea, in April, we were able to manufacture more than 90% of the finished product batches that we had planned, more than 100% of the API batches that we had planned. This with people shortages, with last-minute scrambling for, the most unimportant material that would go into a product. And we were able to take care of requirements in the market as well. A lot of the delivery that happened, there was an uptick in the business in the last 2 weeks of March, whether it was in US, whether it was in India. It continued into the first 2 weeks of April, and then it tapered down. We were able to take care of that. And that was not just from inventory. Part of it was inventory, part of it was what we made, part of it was what we were able to actually ship out as well. Flights were cancelled, alternative means were found. There was a lot of last-minute work, last-mile work that we pulled together in making sure that the company was able to perform. I would say not just for Q4, because I think the first 10 weeks of Q4 were not really impacted, but in the last 2 weeks of Q4 and continuing into even now. I think from that brief period of scrambling to realizing, to kind of starting to work with this, I think now we've got it into a place where we can grow, and I think we've really come together as a team in this time. The business was slated to grow, especially in Q4. As you know, we had a very muted Q3. But on Q4, we were aware that the US business was going to pick up. We got a little bit extra in the India business as well that we were able to cater. A lot of our peers struggled with being able to cater to that. All of that led to, pretty much growth across the board. So while US, for example, year on year looks like a decline, if you take out Renolazine, which we had exclusivity for last year, there was a 5% growth. India grew by 15% actually year on year, more than what they did in on the entire year. From that, pretty much everything performed. I would say not just on the business perspective, but even on the compliance front, we had a very solid end to the year. We had 5 EIRs.
Nathan, I want to come to you when it, just taking a look at the margins, 14%, and that was pretty much in line with what the street expected. Tell us a little bit about what helped you achieve this number and what is the margin trajectory now?
For last quarter was 3,791 crores. We service Q3 of 3,716 crores, a 2% growth. As Nilesh was saying, U.S. sales grew by 13% sequentially. US dollars 212 in quarter 4 as compared to $186 million in quarter 3. Of course, there's a decline we saw the previous year, but that, as he was saying, is essentially because of Renexa. India region, as Nilesh was saying, grew by 15.2%. And we saw some strong growth across the EMEA markets also, 25%, and that is very, very good. There's, of course, some muted sales growth in Latin America, but that's because both Mexico and Brazil had some issues when it came to, in fact, the COVID situation. March especially was very muted out there. In terms of gross margins, we did 62.9%. We saw 63.4% in Q3. That's largely due to, in fact, a sales mix. Of course, there's a decline as compared to the previous year because as the previous year, you would recognize it also included danilazine. The quarter four was also impacted by, there was a component of forex.
Okay, Mr. Gupta, going to come to you then. Let's talk about the US market as well. There has been a strong growth on a sequential basis. Tell us a little bit more about the market share gains for your particular drugs as well, how they've shaped up.
We had a nice bump up in levothyroxine. I think it's still in growth mode. So in the quarters to come, we would expect it to grow more. We had pickup in, products like azithromycin, and those will stay. Some of those will continue because next quarter on, we are going to start getting into the flu season, and there will be uptick for that. I don't think there's any specific one time that stuck out in the quarter. I think there was generally uplift, I would say, other than probably oseltamivir, which would really not happen once we get out of the season. Everything else would continue. We would see, there's definitely, like I said at the start, I think in the last 2 weeks of March, there was definitely additional offtake that continued into the first 2 weeks of April and then came off. But I think we've been able to get the business, like I shared earlier, even in lean times to that 170, 180 million kind of business, and that's what we would expect in Q1 as well.
Mr. Swaminathan, just let's take a look at the internals. There was that one-off gain that was led by the higher channel stocking in the US and India. Would you attribute it purely to that factor? And, can you just give us a little more details on this component?
I would say that perhaps, Q4 in the general sense is always lower than Q3, historically, and that's because it's the leanest season. There's been some upstocking when it came to the last 2 weeks, sort of the 12 weeks, the last 2 weeks alone were because of the COVID period. And you might have seen some kind of channel stocking in a general sense, but that was about it. In America, of course, it also benefited because of that in a very different sense. But by and large, as Nilesh was saying, supply chain was not disrupted. We did very well across the entire period. And of course, there's of course the impact of a higher logistics cost, but there were of course savings possible in across various of the lines. That's I'm really speaking about Q1 here.
Mr. Gupta, now, we've been interacting with a lot of pharma companies as well, and Cipla was in conversation with us saying that prescription drugs have taken a hit because a lot of doctors were not available at this time. Have you seen, some sort of a recovery come by in prescription drugs?
No, so and I think that's a very valid point. I think there is, so I think some of the developed countries like the US, there is almost a fundamental change at this point of time in the way the field is interacting with doctors. So, pretty much all calls are remote, and there is a strong acceptance for something like that. In India, what we're really seeing is that doctors have not been available, and even if doctors were available, then patients were not. Even now, the footfalls into doctors is extremely low. You've seen the IQVIA numbers, so there is a very material decline in on the acute side of the business. So it was so on the chronic side it continues, but the growth in the chronic side is getting impacted as well. So I think while April was actually fine, we actually see May as likely worse than April, and then June will come back into a state of repair as we grow again. I believe that the market will actually degrow in the first quarter, and if that happens, we might too. And I think that's what we're preparing for. And then obviously we will then work on how we build up from Q2 into Q3 and Q4 for markets like India. So it was.
Right. Nilesh, also wanted to understand, what is the update on the launch of Albuterol inhaler? What about the approval, and what is the updates now on the remote audit of Goa and other plants, where there still is a warning letter?
Albuterol, as you know, we had guided to a second half of the year launch. We have had a very strong positive movement on the file with FDA, and hopefully, if things go well, then we should be, we would love to be able to be in a position to launch it even sooner. As far as the sites are concerned, I think Somerset we're pretty much up, ready for inspection. Goa in the next couple of months will be ready for a re-inspection as well. We still have to see how the FDA will do it. Clearly, they'll not be in person, but we still have to see how FDA will do it. But broadly, we talked about both Goa and Somerset to be cleared in the course of the fiscal. We are on track for that.
Gentlemen, great to have you on the show and discuss the earnings and, more importantly, future visibility for Lupin. Good speaking with you.